We are Lisa Oforji,
Olivier Jauniaux,
and Annika Francis.
Our text is Peter Eisenman's PhD dissertation, The Formal Basis of Modern Architecture. In the 50s, after traveling in Europe, Peter Eisenman wanted to write an analytical work inspired by the architecture he experienced. The dissertation is a theoretical construct that bears on modern architecture through analyzing form. During his time at Cambridge, he was influenced by his mentor, Colin Rowe.
This dissertation was seeded during a time of formal vacuum. By this, Eisenman means that architectural history did not deal with the analysis of the theoretical concepts of form. In 1963, after completing his PhD, Eisenman was advised by Sir Leslie not to publish anything until he was 35. It was eventually published in 2006. The dissertation is structured in 5 chapters. The first 3 define and describe the concepts and processes that will apply to his examples of modern architecture. To do this, Eisenman uses graphical representation of his definitions, introducing the reader to his concepts. The 4th chapter divides and classifies the different architects and their buildings. He provides evidence for his comments on the various buildings through his drawings referring back to his previously defined terms. The final chapter concludes his theories on modern architecture.
The dissertation expresses the importance of form. He describes architecture as a 3-dimensional volume in time and space, dismissing the space within as merely practical. The volume is affected by internal and external forces, resulting in the distortion of the cube. Yet Eisenman is not interested in the isolation of individual forms. He develops and analyzes a language and order which uses geometrical solids as a point of reference. For Eisenman, the design process simplifies into function, intent, hierarchy of elements, and structure. He divides form into 2 types: generic, a 3-dimensional form, either centroidal or linear, and specific, the physical configuration in response to intent and function. Form is examined in relation to structure and tectonics, where structure is the framework for the translation of intent and function into reality. It includes columns, slabs, pipe ducts, and mechanical services of the building. The methods used to demonstrate the structure establishes the relationship of techniques and structure in the hierarchy of elements. Techniques are the details and methods of architecture. Because of its utilitarian nature, techniques relates almost entirely to the specifics rather than the generic, and consequently receives the lowest priority in the hierarchy of elements. Eisenman argues that order must be inherent in the giving of form. Form is therefore specific, yet at the same time generic. It provides the means of expressing intent and function, creating an ordered environment.
Eisenman doesn't discuss whether forms are subject to aesthetics or taste. Instead, forms are examined in relation to structure and techniques. To understand volume, he uses movement and experience, showing that ideas from the author to the receiver should be clear. Thus, Eisenman demonstrates that architectural forms develop from internal and external functional requirements, like syntax and language. Thus, he describes architecture as a formal language, ordered through a series of rules. The grammar of a building comes from its form and construction. Eisenman simplifies the generic form of architecture using Euclidean shapes, cubes, and spheres as a foundation of the perception of space. He demonstrates that volumes, which are either negative or positive, can be expressed through their implied movement system, the pinwheel, spiral, and echelon. Eisenman then moves on to analyze the architecture of Le Corbusier, Alter, Tarragne, and Frank Lloyd Wright, masters of modern architecture, comparing 2 of each of their buildings. Eisenman analyzes Le Corbusier's pavilion suite through a compressive force applied to the sides, thus creating the forms. His Cité de Refuge uses the same mechanisms, where instead of crushing there is a suction force. Wright's buildings are compared with their linear nature, one building parallel, one perpendicular to dominant external axis, breaking down the syntax through the internal and external functional requirements. This becomes similar to the syntax used in Le Corbusier's buildings.
With Aalto, the analysis using syntactic models becomes even more complex. Yet, Eisenman also demonstrates that Aalto's buildings are close to the grammar of Le Corbusier's, a dominant volumetric order combined with a secondary movement system. Taragni's work is analysed differently through a mass surface dialect. Taragni's building language seems to originate from Le Corbusier's notion of mass and surface, but Taragni distorts the Cartesian grid in order to achieve his desired ambiguity. Eisenman finishes his dissertation by commenting on architecture in general, criticising how architectural history and theory was analysed at the time. Eisenman's dissertation attempts to read architecture as an open-ended system of volume and form. Eisenman's dissertation is more critical than historical. In the 60s, architectural theory emphasised history and iconography. Eisenman's analysis starts the trend developed in the 70s of linguistics and semiotics as issues of architectural theory. Eisenman's text is unique for redesigning buildings in order to analyse them. It remains one of the few texts which carries out formal analysis of buildings realised by others.
In Rainer Banham's book, Theory and Design in the First Machine Age, Banham denies the possibility of establishing principles based on the analysis of form. Any system referring to regular solids or symbolic forms are a resurrection of a dead language. However, Eisenman considers architecture as a formal language, which is a contradiction to Banham. The square layout of the book is to express Eisenman's theories on generic forms, explaining why Eisenman had to obtain special permission from the university to produce the work as such. Having footnotes alongside the text was a new approach to referencing, making them more readable. The published version is all capitalized in typewritten, printed single-sided to stay true to its original format from 1963. It allows the reader to understand the information, providing a location to link the freehand drawings with the related text. He uses these to analyze the buildings, essential to illustrate his arguments.